speak to Dan Hodges from the Mail on Sunday and find out what he makes of it. Dan, very good morning to you.
Morning.
It's not been a great week again, has it, for old Keir Starmer? He's now been accused on the front pages this morning by the Israeli foreign minister of handing out Hamas a prize for terror. As the situation over in the Middle East doesn't get any easier. He's been accused also now of trying to get back into the European Union by stealth because of the reset. And back home, he's got the migrant problem, which isn't going away.
Yeah, as ever, we start off with a plethora of bad news for Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
I mean, you picked. I mean, to take the top one we mentioned there. I mean, obviously, the Israelis have said that Keir Starmer is rewarding Hamas for their campaign of terror. But it's not just the Israelis. I mean, obviously, Hamas themselves have said that the decision to recognise Palestine is a product of their attacks. And obviously, I think for me, most significantly, obviously the families of the hostages and those that were killed on October the 7th, they themselves have said that Keir Starmer's policy risks leaving their loved ones rotting in Hamas dungeons.
Yeah.
So, and again, I mean, I say this every time I come on, I literally don't understand why Keir Starmer and the government aren't able to say, look, we will not countenance a policy of recognition of the state of Palestine until the hostages have been released. I mean, it's just, it's so, on a humanitarian level, on a diplomatic level, and on a political level, it's self-evidently what the policy needs to be. And I cannot understand, I spent the last week and the weekend phoning people trying to get some sort of understanding about why Keir Starmer did this. Now, partly it was because, again, he was ambushed by his cabinet and forced and pushed and bullied by members of his cabinet into changing his stance. But as I wrote at the weekend, this is just becoming a pattern for Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
He just, as I said, he's quite openly betrayed the families of the hostages, and as I said, if he's prepared to betray them, he's prepared to betray anyone, in my view.
Well, quite. I mean, you call him a charlatan this week, and I don't think that's off the mark at all, because unfortunately, it seems to me, I was asking this question a couple of days ago, it's almost as though nobody in Downing Street has a conversation about what might happen when we do this. Like if we decide that we're going to, recognise Palestine as a state, what could be the, results of us saying that as a British government? It's almost as though nobody asked the question.
Exactly. I did specifically call him a charlatan, and I didn't use the phrase lightly. And I want to be clear, because obviously people criticise me for it. As ever, when I make these comments, I'm talking about Keir Starmer, the politician, not Keir Starmer, the person. It's not in a sense a personal assault. It's a political criticism of him, but it's something that we've seen now throughout Keir Starmer's premiership. I mean, if you remember at the very beginning, when he launched his campaign to be Labour leader, he positioned himself as somebody who was a friend of the left of the Labour Party. We had, this video that he produced of him, campaigning for, people who were campaigning against military, representing people who campaign against military bases and representing the unions. And he had his 10 left-wing pledges, and he was wandering around telling everybody he was Jeremy Corbyn's friend. And then he immediately, as soon as he got what he wanted and he got power, he immediately moved away and ditched the left. And we see that time and time again. This is now Keir Starmer's MO. This is one that I genuinely I do think is disgraceful. That the man literally, on the anniversary of the Hamas attacks, he brought the families into Downing Street. He sat with them in Downing Street. He looked them in the eye and he said, you are going to be my priority, and we obviously are going to want to try and sort out the broader situation in Israel, Palestine, the Middle East. But obviously, the release of your family members is going to essentially going to be my priority. And as we now know, that was a lie, and he has completely reversed that, and basically is now saying, well, yes, I'll listen to the hostage families, but I want to go ahead with this policy. This has got broader implications for Keir Starmer moving forward, because the simple fact is, like I'm talking about the hostage families, we've seen it with pensioners, we've seen it with the WASPy women. Every commitment Keir Starmer gave to anyone in advance of him becoming Prime Minister is no longer valid, right? As soon as it became politically advantageous for him to ditch his pledges, he's quite prepared to ditch them. And he's going to keep doing that moving forward. It's quite clear that, frankly, any commitment that Keir Starmer gives to any group or any sector of British society, we're going to protect hardworking British families. It's just not valid.
No.
And
but it's just like his Twitter account is a kind of extension of his personality, it seems to me. I appreciate you're trying to separate, the man from the politician, but he makes these claims constantly, which is simply not true. People see through it when you see the comments underneath, and I know that it's not the real world and all of that, but it kind of gives you a glimpse into his world, and everything that he claims is happening, isn't it? I mean, like today, the first tweet he's put out is about congratulating people in Scotland on their exam results, right? And what he doesn't seem to know is that actually quite a lot of people in Scotland won't be getting their exam results today because of the storm yesterday. For some reason, they're all going to get delayed. So once again, it's like, who's doing his thinking for him?
Well, we had the situation last week where, he sent out a tweet saying Britain is currently in the midst of a housing crisis,
right,
and we are going to solve it. But if you remember, we discussed it literally, I think 3 or 4 days before. He turned up in front of the liaison committee and said, "Oh no, there's lots of spare housing, and we're going to be putting asylum seekers in it."
Right.
We see it with the economy, with Rachel Reeves literally standing up at the Mansion House and saying one of the things that this government has done is we finally got on top of the mountain of debt. And literally 2 days later, the figures show debt under the government is soaring. And it's like you said, that is the strategy. It's literally to lie about these things. But again, what I don't understand is why, because ministers know the facts are there, they're readily available, and people are just simply going to turn around and say, look, these are the facts.
Yeah.
And the point is, but also people are living their lives. They are experiencing all this. So when the government's wandering around saying, "Oh, actually, we've got on top of the economy now." The economy, the classic one, the economy's improving. That's why we can change our policy in relation to winter fuel. Everything's better now. We filled in the black hole because of the tough decisions we've made. Everything's great now, and they know that's not true.
Right.
And I don't understand why ministers can't see that.
Right. And so why do they keep on with the same kind of wrong-headedness, it would seem? I mean, it's almost a pig-headedness, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, look, you obviously led, and you're obviously going to be talking a lot about, obviously, the immigration issue and the small boats issue. Now, in fairness to the government, and I think we're slightly losing sight of that, and it's important to remember, the small boats crisis was not a crisis that began on their watch. This was a problem they've inherited. And at the beginning,
but it has got a lot worse though since they got in.
But this is the key thing. Now, at the beginning, they introduced a series of new measures, smashing the gangs, trying to disrupt the mechanics, if you like, of the people smuggling operation. That was fine. That was a perfectly legitimate approach. Initially, it had some effect. But it's quite clear the gangs have adapted now. Yeah. And as a result of that approach isn't working. But this, as you say, is the problem. What we're now in the situation is ministers such as Yvette Cooper are simply pointing to, we've introduced this measure, we've introduced that measure, we're going to have one in, one out, which is an absolutely ridiculous
it's not even true
policy, because what people are going to do, they hear the government phrase one in, one out, they're going to see the net small boat arrival figures, and in a month's time or 2 months' time, it won't have been one in, one out, it'll be one out, a couple of hundred in.
Right.
And
It'll
people
probably be none
gonna,
out. I mean, because they haven't they haven't even said,
possible.
right, how they have. She said this morning we're going to detain people, right? But she doesn't say where she's going to detain them, how she's going to detain them, how long for, and under what circumstances, and under what charge, if you like. And then they're going to be returned, but she doesn't say how they're going to be returned.
No, absolutely. But this is the problem. What is now happening with ministers across the spectrum? They are exclusively focusing on process. So they are saying, look, we've introduced this policy, and we've introduced that policy, and we've introduced one in, one out, and we've introduced we've had negotiations with the Germans and the French, and we're disrupting the transport of the boats, etc., etc. All of which is good, but the problem is it's not working. Or if it is working, it's not working to the extent that it can actually solve the problem in the round. And all the British people are seeing now is ministers like Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer standing up and saying, we are doing X, Y, and Z in relation to the small boats. And then the next day, they're seeing the latest set of figures, and they're seeing, over the last month, another 2 or 3, 4 or 10,000 people, illegally entered the UK.
Right.
And that is the problem. So what the ministers are now trying to do, because they're starting to appreciate that, is now they're literally lying. And they're trying to lie and just literally say, we're dealing with the problem, when the facts show that they're obviously not.
Right. And so when the facts then show them up to be lying, what do they do then? They just start moving on to another subject and pretend they never said it.
Well, that's the point. And I've written about this. This is what is now happening within Downing Street. So there is now a debate going on within Downing Street, in which some people within Downing Street are saying, look, immigration, small boats, it's the number one issue. It's the thing we have to grip. If we don't grip, we're dead politically. Other people in Downing Street are wanting Keir Starmer to throw a deflection, are saying, stop small. We can't deal with the small boats. We can't get on top of the problem. So stop talking about it. Talk about, I don't know, free breakfast clubs in schools, or try and talk about some elements of a new house building program.
Yeah.
And basically try and make the British people forget or shift their priorities onto other issues. But obviously that's not.
But that's not going to work either.
It's such an emotive issue.
Yeah.
This has been such a toxic issue, and this has been top of, people's concerns now, going back for years. It's precisely why we've seen, the surge of reform here. It's a global phenomenon. It's not just people in Britain who are expressing concern about this. We can see it across Europe. We can obviously see it in the United States with Trump. And that is the reality. I know it's hard. I know ministers inherited an appalling situation from the previous government, but the reality is they are going to have to grip this crisis, because if they don't, then we as a country and they as a government are in serious
and
trouble.
Also, there are more countries around the world now that are dealing with it better than Britain. America has dealt with it. Trump said that when he came. He said, you might not believe him, but he said, no immigrants illegally came into the United States of America last month. Because he's clamped right down on it. Similarly, in Greece, they've got a detention centre which they're now putting together in Crete, and there for 3 months they've abandoned any kind of asylum system. They're saying anybody who comes here from North Africa is going to go straight into a detention centre.
But this again, I wrote about this last week. It's the kind of, if you like, it's the alligator Alcatraz solution, right?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of what Trump has been saying has been rubbish, right? Has been rubbish in terms of the things he was going to do. But the one thing that you cannot criticise Trump, you can criticise him, but the fact is, the nature of the rhetoric and the nature of the posture he has on immigration has meant a lot of people who were potentially thinking of coming to the States, especially across the southern border, are now saying, I am not going to bother, because this guy is literally going to feed me to alligators in the swamp. Now, you may not like Trump's rhetoric, but it is having an effect. What Keir Starmer has been trying to do is a quite managerial, mechanistic, we're going to just disrupt the people smugglers approach.
Yeah.
I understand that, and I understand why, but it's quite clearly not working. And if he wants to solve the problem, he's going to have to find a way to put up in lights and communicate to the world and people potentially coming to the UK illegally. I'm very sorry, it's not going to work. You come here, you're going back. You come here, you are not going to like what you experience when you get to the UK. And it's a terrible thing to say, but that is the only solution to the crisis, and Keir Starmer is going to have to grasp that.
And he obviously doesn't feel like he can say that, because all he can say now is smashing the gangs, you know, breaking up the vile people smugglers. You know, he's always aiming it at them. So it makes it sound as though he's not having a go at the people who are coming here, many of whom are coming here with what you might at least describe as bad intent. You know, because I think that's the other problem that he's faced, is that, you know, perhaps in years gone by, as the problem got worse under the Tories, it wasn't quite as focused as it is now on what appears to be gangs of young men coming, you know, quite braggadocious types, you know, making videos as they come, you know, taking pictures of people outside of migrant hotels, waving at them, blowing kisses at them. You know, this is a slightly different kind of illegal migrant story now, I think, because you know, there may well have even been a time when more families were coming. But right now, what it looks like is we're being, you know, invaded by a sort of marauding force of rather arrogant and perhaps not very lawful individuals.
Well, I mean, we talked about this last week. I mean, I went down to the Bell Hotel, and the local residents made precisely in Essex, and the local residents made precisely that point. There had been a period where the hotel had been filled with families.
Yeah.
They were moved, and then it was filled with exclusively young men who, you know, the point is, they don't even need to engage in overtly illegal activity.
Yeah.
Just having young men hanging around, drinking, just you know, openly drinking, hanging around, not doing anything, because obviously there's nothing for them to do. Local residents find that very intimidating. That's before you introduce obviously some of the very extreme incidents that have been reported recently. But I thought your caller made a very, very good point. It's a classic example. Yvette Cooper is standing up talking about the one-in, one-out scheme and saying this is an excellent scheme because it allowed us to do proper security checks on the people that are coming in. Fine. But what is the implication of that for the people who are already
here, and
the people who aren't coming into those routes? And by implication, Yvette Cooper is saying to people, I'm very sorry, but if you live in one of those communities where we are currently housing people who have entered by these illegal routes, then I'm sorry, you're right. They have not had a proper security check, and that they therefore do represent a threat to you and your community.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is that is the problem with the government's sort of, as it were, managerial approach to this crisis.
Yeah, it is, and it's not going to go away until they change their approach, as you say. Dan, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.